Life and Adventures of Jack Engle, an Autobiography, in which the reader will find some familiar characters, by Walt Whitman. Read by Frank Blissett. Chapter 15. I could only sit and listen without saying a word then, for such a web of villainy and romance quite took away my breath. Was my mind under the influence of no dream? Had I not been overpowered with some work of fiction? No. I looked deliberately about the little attic bedroom, and there was the high window, and on another side Wigglesworth's lank bed with its check coverlid, and nearby the antiquated washstand, and the table by which we sat, and on which lay a package of manuscript, and leaning against the wall an odd chair, and all lit up by the lamp giving its flickering light. And there, in the kind of seat called a Boston rocker, sat poor old Wigglesworth himself. Although he had been out that afternoon, towards dark, and had a long interview with Martha, it was more than he ought to have done. I was quite shocked with the ghastly appearance of the poor old man, and his lurid and bloodshot eyes. He could not be long for this world. Indeed, he told me he didn't think he should have lived till the present hour, except that he thought he had one work to perform, and he couldn't rest in peace if it was not done. "I tell you, Jack," said he, excitedly, "this is all that has kept me up for a long while past. As for my body, it gave out months ago. It is dead, I tell you. You can see that for yourself." Poor creature! You did look more like a corpse that moment than a living being. "The mind, Jack," the old man went on. "I never before thought it had such wonderful power. But I resolved to live until I had unraveled the web of deviltry which, as I have told you, I providentially got the clue of. I determined that I would last till this revelation could be made, was made, and now, oh, my God, I thank thee." He motioned to me to hand him a glass of water from the stand. When he had taken it, he continued, "You will know without my telling you that I, soon after my engagement in his office, found out Covert to be a villain. I knew, too, that he had, as Martha's guardian, control over quite an extensive property. But, bad as he was at heart, I did not until lately believe him so utterly vile as not only to defraud her of her inheritance, but to make that friendless girl a victim to his licentious passions. I started, and now, I began to see the meaning of Martha's note and its hidden allusions. Wigglesworth went on. "Martha's affairs involve a peculiar history, extending many years back. The package on the table there was written by her father, written in prison, where he was confined for a terrible crime done in the heat of passion. That crime, with its imprisonment and his death, could not but exercise a gloomy effect upon her, although she was an infant when they occurred. Poor girl! The more I have learned, the more I am interested about her, and this afternoon's interview with her decided me to unburthen the whole matter, without any reserve, to you. It was for the better understanding of it all that Martha gave me her father's story, prepared by himself, which reached her from a trusty source, some time since, and which she has kept, unknown to covert. Take this packet, then, Jack, but do not read it till you have leisure to weigh well what you read. Some evening let it be, when you are alone, for there is weighty stuff in it. And though you already know the particulars which are contained in it, you have perhaps a right to hear the witness of him who made you fatherless, and to know how deeply he repented and suffered for it. Truly it was more like romance than sober life, in a dwelling in one of the streets of this matter-of-fact city. And, after I had buttoned the manuscript in my breast pocket, I had to thump there from time to time to convince myself that I was really awake. As I rose to bid him good night, Wigglesworth took my hand between his, and I felt those feeble palms, thin and cold. "Jack," said he, "do not think I wander in my thoughts, but I know that I have not many days, perhaps many hours, more to live. I have left some few directions with the landlord who keeps this place. He is an honest man whom I have known for years, and I am sure he will obey them faithfully. You will think me something of an aristocrat, Jack, but I wish to be buried in my mother's vault. She was of the old English stock, the early ones here, Jack, in Trinity churchyard. That will cost money, too, as the city regulations are now. But I have long provided for that, and my landlord, who knows my wish, is my banker. You shall go with my old friend, probably indeed none but you two, and see that my shattered hulk is put away there, according to my wish. Will you not, Jack?" I strove, although it went somewhat against the grain, for I felt a profound sadness. I strove to answer in a cheerful manner, and told him that we might have many a pleasant supper together yet, and that he would get over his illness and come out a new man. The old clerk made no response, for he saw that my cheerfulness was labored. That chilling, feeble pressure of his thin, pulseless hands at parting, it sends a palsy through me as I remember it now. Only when I got out in the cool, open air, and slowly, very slowly, took my way home, did the information I had gathered that evening take consistent form and shape, and spread out before me in a manner that I could realize and bring it home to myself as a tangible history. To myself. Yes, it concerned me as nearly as the young Quakeress, of whom Covert was the guardian. Strange that our interests were, after all, so closely connected together, and not only our interests, but our very lives, bound by a doubly solemn tie. Yes, myself. From what Wigglesworth had gathered, I at last knew of myself. The old man had been indefatigable, and truly, as he said, for the last few months, had lived but for hardly any other purpose than to investigate and make plain the mystery. He had even, by dint of the closest inquiry, going backward many years, sought out the whereabouts and particulars of the strange visitor who, years before, boarded with Kelvin Peterson, and whose visit to Ephraim's and real or apparent knowledge of me and my origin I have mentioned in a former chapter. This man Wigglesworth pursued the track of. He discovered the place to which he sailed, and that he had settled there, and was living there yet. The old clerk entered into correspondence with him, and his information corroborated what he had before suspected. In many other ways, in every way, by examining the records of courts, by retrospective searches in every quarter, the ardent old man had come to such a state of certainty as to leave no room for doubt or disbelief. Moreover, accompanying the manuscript which he gave me were papers that fortified to a point of positive proof every point of the following strange narrative. Martha's father was a young man of what the followers of Penn calls the world's people. It was only her mother who belonged to the Quaker sect. The match, however, was one altogether for love. They had no other child but the little girl. They were possessed of very considerable wealth, and lived in comfortable style, in a house he owned, just near enough to the great metropolis to give him all the advantages of its luxuries and its intellectual enjoyments, and just far enough away for him to possess the pleasures of country freedom and space. For the husband was a man of some literary taste, and, young as he was, he had seen much of the world, having traveled both abroad and in America. Like the blast of death, or the trumpet of the destroying angel, there came, in the twinkling of an eye, something that destroyed at once all these blessings, present and in perspective. A horrible occurrence, none the less deadly in its consequences, because it was partly the result of one of those fearful and accidental liabilities to which any man or family might be subject, came to wither the happiness of a loving husband and wife, and have a future effect on a beautiful and innocent child. The husband and wife bent to the destructive blow, and lifted not their heads from the ground, in which they sought nothing better than quiet graves. The child was too young to feel the horror that overwhelmed her parents. She grew up under other fostering care, into the beautiful and tender-natured, but still bold and energetic, Martha. This fearful thing was, that the husband, in a moment of excessive irritation, struck one of his workmen who had somehow offended him, a deadly blow on the head. It caused death, and that death, by a coincidence that made my blood chill, was none other than the death of my own father. Again, I had to connect in my mind, link by link, the inevitable chain of evidence that Wigglesworth had gathered, before I could believe anything so much like romance. The murderer was arrested, put in confinement, and, in due time, arrived the day appointed for his trial. But that day he never saw. He was in prison but a few hours when his young wife, overwhelmed with these dismal misfortunes, died of a broken heart, and, after that, he sank slowly but surely into decay, and only asked to be buried by her side. Yet during the days before his death, his mind, which seemed to have been of great natural resolution, did not fail him. He arranged his worldly affairs with great circumspection, drew up most of his own papers under legal advice, and had them properly certified and recorded. He made his will, in which he did not forget the offspring of the poor workman, his victim. It is useless to deny that I both look upon the slain man and feel toward him nothing more than as I would look upon the same gloomy fate befalling a stranger. And is it wonderful that it is so? He was, indeed, though my parent, really a stranger. Our feelings are the creatures of association and education, and even while my brain felt the shock through sympathy that must have followed all those events, I thought of them more as a listener to the story than as one having any special point of interest that came home pointedly to me. And, reader, that is the way I feel about it to this day. I will have the merit of candor, if I have not of sensitive feelings. The day appointed for the trial found the accused man before a higher tribunal than any here on earth. It was the day on which he was buried by the side of his wife, and then the affair, which had been much talked about, and will even now be remembered by some perhaps who read these lines, dropped away gradually from the public mind. It so happened that the principal legal adviser for Martha's father, during the few weeks of his imprisonment, was Covert, then just commencing the practice of the profession. He so wrought upon the young man's mind, distracted with his condition, as to be appointed guardian of his infant daughter, and to get the general control of his estate. Although the father was prudent enough to put certain checks on Covert's movements, and effect, to some extent, a superior control over that cunning villain, the main object of which had been for many years on the part of the lawyer to circumvent and get out of the way. Kelvin Peterson's pious boarder, who had come to see me at Ephraim's, was my father's brother. One of his answers to Wigglesworth stated that my mother's death took place a year or two before my father was killed, and that I was their only child. By the copies of documents which Wigglesworth put me in possession of, it appeared that the will of Martha's father directed the settlement of 1/3 of his fortune upon the offspring of, as he termed it, his victim. This item, and the specific directions regarding it, appeared to have been prepared and recorded with all the forethought which characterized the arrangement of his other affairs. Covert, undoubtedly, at some pains and care to himself, kept this point a secret, for he was made thoroughly aware of the wishes of that unfortunate gentleman, and of the fact that the slain workman had a little child who would be turned loose upon the world uncared for. That he wished the sole management of the property, intending it should eventually come into his own hands, was enough to make him lie low in the beginning. It was also enough afterwards, when he learned, as he did learn, that the little lost waif had turned up in the student of his own office to make him continue the game of deceit and false-facedness. Undoubtedly, after my father's death, for I was too little to remember anything at all about it, I had been turned from door to door, in some way escaping the cold charities of the almshouse, as I was, it seems, not absolutely without the power of locomotion. But I have already treated to a sufficient degree on that part of my history, and if there is anything more wanting, the reader must supply it from his or her imagination. That was Chapter 15 of Life and Adventures of Jack Engle, an autobiography, in which the reader will find some familiar characters, by Walt Whitman. Read by Frank Blissett.